executive communication. In a post-pandemic economy, how do I right-size my salaries? That's a question that a lot of our CEOs in Vistage and a lot of our executives are asking.
Yeah, it's a big one, Jerry. You know, as we start to look at growth over the next 3 to 7 years, mid and small businesses have this unbelievable opportunity to accelerate growth and to actually capture business from very large organizations that are either divesting or downsizing. So how do we actually capture that and stay in budget? And this is a big question on my CEO's mind. So in the executive communication exchange, I thought this would be a great opportunity for you and I to throw out to the audience and other leaders, you know, what are some of your thoughts and ideas, and how are you wrestling with this very important question?
Yeah, it's interesting as growth is always a priority. Our costs have now significantly risen. Also, what are those responsibilities for those employees that we're now paying, a significantly higher percentage rate than we did pre-pandemic? What are their roles? What are their responsibilities? And what's their output when it comes to our growth and our revenue? These are questions that everybody seems to have a different answer or a slightly different approach to. But they are absolutely key and critical for us moving forward as a successful, sort of mid-range economy.
Exactly. You know, I think about that, and during pandemic, a lot of the roles were squeezed down, right? Because people had a lot on their plate. They had mental stress, family stress, economic stress, and they were all trying to figure out, I've got to pay these bills. I've got to be able to get through this. I want to make sure my value is being really, supported. But as we start to normalize, maybe instead of just bringing one person on, you start to split those resources and really make sure that they're delivering robust value in their roles and responsibilities for this escalated salary that's been given. That's one of the how do I's that we've been dealing with in our issue processing with some of our CEOs. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it's interesting. It's almost this idea of fractional leadership. It's almost fractional middle management, right? We had less people in offices. We needed less middle management. We really focused on just driving tasks and communicating those tasks. Now, as we sort of gradually go back to the office, managing those people now becomes a top priority. When you're not in quote unquote teams or the group chats communicating anymore, when you're in the office, how are we tracking what people are doing? I think for me, the most interesting aspect is we've risen the cost. We've really escalated the cost of salaries. And do people now making more money, do they believe they can or they want to still do the same amount of work? Are they going to pare back? It's interesting that over the pandemic, I think people have got comfortable with a certain amount of work being done and then a certain amount of personal time. I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's just sort of an observation.
Yeah.
And how does that play out in terms of production within that company now? Because I think certain companies were okay with just maybe surviving during the pandemic.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think we're starting to, again, get back into what's your cultural contribution. And that extra contribution is what really helps people to personally develop, for their organization to actually demonstrate the behaviors that make their values come alive, and really helps the overall organization grow. All the boats go up. Many of the CEOs were just, I just can't do that. I've had to put some of that on hold because we're just not in that group synergy in the office that makes those innovation tasks and those innovation groups come alive, and the extras that say, okay, let's go out into the community and make a contribution in the community. Some of those things were lost. So the good news is we get much more of that human, people to people social engagement going on. We also get more individual collective contribution, but we also start to really think about how do we drive merit, which I think is also going to be important to begin to right size this rather than, hey, everybody's got to be, paid at the top of the salary range. Now what we have to do is think about, do we cap some of those things and really drive merit based on people performance as well as personal development and their contribution to culture and community. I think we're getting back into that more holistic value delivery that's coming post-pandemic. It'll probably take a while, but most CEOs, I think, are looking for their people to make that more well-rounded contribution.
That's interesting. I like the way you said that. And we during the pandemic, we almost went to this impersonal approach, right? Because we were all online. We were doing these Zoom meetings, and people would sort of be prepared for an hour Zoom meeting, but then go back and do something else, right? And get in their own sort of space. Now that we're coming back to, be in the office, to focus on culture, to focus on promoting that company, we're now asking people to go 100% in all day. And are they willing to do that? Some of the people in the Vistage meetings that I've been a part of are struggling to find the people in that middle management role to do the work. They've been paid now as maybe a step above that, a higher manager, and they're not willing to go back and do the work. They're looking for other workers, but so many people have been paid higher salary. Are they willing to take a step back and do some of the work that's now necessary? And I think that's been a question that we've been asking in some of those meetings.
Right. So is that commensurate, right? So, yeah, I don't know. I think it just is going to take a little bit of that evolution, that little bit of right sizing. I think it really takes a very strong leader to be able to deliver a message of expectation, because most people rise to the level of the expectation that they're aligned to, that they value, and they're communicated in a way in which they could see what's in it for me. And I think we just have to remember, what's in it for me is the question that every employee, high, low, across the organization, is always going to ask. So as we get ready for growth and we start putting in either new roles and or new positions and start to look for that balance, I think our leaders have to be able to articulate very clearly what's expected, what are the behaviors that really drive the passion of our organization, and then how does this get answered by you, employee? What's in it for me, and what contributions am I willing to make? Those are one-to-one questions that have to be asked in your monthly one-to-one to make sure that there's no misalignment. Then the idea of the salary, hopefully, as they look at, how they all benefit from a growing, thriving company, it starts to become less the big topic like it was in pandemic, and much more about my contribution, my passion being fulfilled, my development, and my contribution to the growth of the company. That's my hope. That's my optimism coming out right there.
Well, it's interesting, and I think what you're leading to, and you bring up this a really good point, and I'm curious to know if our leaders are ready for it. But the true CEOs, the C-suite executives, now are going to take on multiple roles that they didn't have pre-pandemic, because they do need to be able to engage with the employees on a very different level. When before it was really about almost what can you do for the company, right? It's now going to be, why are you at this company, and what can we do for you, the employee, and what else do you need? While that employee is giving maybe an average value, that CEO needs to make sure that they're engaging with all of their employees and exciting them all to what that message is. They all have to buy in. People have options now, right? And that CEO needs to be a big leader and bigger than they did, bigger than they were pre-pandemic. And I think that's what we're doing at Vistage, right? If you look at the way we do executive development, it's critical. I don't think leaders that are not going to be taking on their personal and professional development as a number one priority are going to have the same success they did um, pre-pandemic. I think you bring a really good point up of what strong leadership means post-pandemic versus pre-pandemic.
Yeah. Well, leadership development has always been one of the CEO's primary roles and responsibility. What I think I hear you saying, and I think you're right, in listening to the group CEOs, their perspective is around maybe pandemic just helped us to balance it. It's an alignment and a sort of a human relationship, all boats rise kind of dance now. I think, employees thought that, owners and CEOs broke the mold and cracked some of that trust before pandemic. In pandemic, it looked like, the power struggle landed in the employees' lap. And now that we're starting to right size, we've got some big companies that are divesting. We've got more people in the marketplace. There's more competition for these jobs. We're starting to feel a little bit more of maybe an equal weight balance. So it's a great time, I think, for CEOs to start talking about this with their leadership team, putting a strong communication plan in place, and really start to look forward, because there's a huge opportunity, according to economic advisors, between now and 2030 for small, and this is it. If you're going to grow, if you're going to really make it, in our time anyway, it looks like the next 7 years is a real opportunity. So make the most of it.
You know what? It's so interesting, and I agree with everything you're saying. I might even say that people would be more apt to choose a job based upon their executive leadership than the company name, right? And I think we're at a point now where if I had a friend that was interviewing for a leadership role in Arizona here, and they were meeting with the executive team, and the conversation wasn't about the company, it was about the executive team makeup, what their perspective was, what their culture, what the culture they were creating was. And
Yeah.
it wasn't until 20 minutes into the conversation I said, what does the company do?
There you go. It reminds me of I'm facilitating a strategic design thinking course that Vistage has in partnership with Stanford. And it reminds me of what you're saying. People may not use this language, but it's who are the people? What's the architecture? So what does the leadership structure look like? What are your routines? Like, people want to know how does work get done? Is it all in-house? Is it somewhat virtual? Are there flexible hours? How do you feel about family, culture, values, balance, and of course, big C, culture? So that PARC, maybe is exactly what you're saying, is people are starting to want to know holistically, what is this company all about? And then I'll find out whether or not I'm a good fit. It's a good fit for me, that kind of two-way architecture.
Yeah, during the pandemic, we all got a chance to work from home and have a little bit more for the first time ever, work balance, work-life balance. I don't think people are willing to give that up. How it evolves now that we're going back to the office, and now that we need to figure out how to right size salaries, and get back into the growth phase. All of this stuff's gonna be factored in. I think the leadership and the CEOs and the C-suite executives that are taking this stuff on as a personal challenge to themselves are going to be very, very successful. It's
Mhm.
almost their EQ. There were leadership teams that were focused on growth, and there were leadership teams focused on culture. I don't think you can get away with one or the other anymore.
Right. And the other thing is everybody's got to be more flexible. One right, for everyone doesn't work anymore. So we recently had a fabulous presenter. His name was David Braun from Capstone, and their growth strategies. And it's not grow or die, it's change or die. And it was a fascinating switch of, your mindset, because we all think growth is a forward trajectory. And he leveled out the playing field and said, no, growth has got a whole different definition in today's world. And there are so many other growth possibilities. He really opened up our minds. But the one thing he said is, if the C-suite is not forward thinking, innovative oriented, and really looking at adjacent growth while they're trying to right size some of this, it's a tough equation right now. I mean, it's always a tough job being in the C-suite, but right now, when you're trying to prepare for the future and right size from the past, wow, that takes a very special leader. And I think that's one of the things Vistage does, is open up minds, provides relevant information, gives people perspective, and then gives them a chance with accountability partners to go try a few things. I mean, if there's ever been a time, where people could really use the collective wisdom of sometimes 100 years in the room, I'm seeing that as a real vital element to CEO success.
Yeah, and I really like what you said in terms of understanding what the the evolving definition of growth is, and what as leadership we need to do to ensure that it continues to evolve and move forward. I've always been impressed by what Vistage does when you sit in a room with 16 other CEOs who are experts in areas you're not, who have 10 years experience. To your point, there's another 160 years of experience, executive experience you're getting. Vistage members, their companies, in the first 2 years that, according to Dun& Bradstreet, that they're members of Vistage, they grow their annual revenue 2.8 times greater than the
Right.
previous 2 years they were not members.
Right.
Right. So, and I think part of that is significant is the personal growth that we're talking about, understanding how their companies are evolving, understanding how these definitions. Think about how many PE, private equity groups, have purchased mid-sized companies during the pandemic. They now have new leadership. Like, what does growth mean? What does culture mean? And how do we make sure that we're doing both of those things? We would love to hear anybody. One of the things that Donna and I are always interested in understanding is, what are you doing for your companies out there? DM us, message us, let us know what your companies are dealing with and how they struggle. I'm Jerry Mastelon. I'm a Vistage chair here in Arizona. Donna Kent is a Vistage chair here in Arizona, and we are looking to bring as much new, as much current, as much helpful information forward to our executive teams as humanly possible, as current as we can. So these are discussions, and these are topics that are hot and happening in the moment with our members' companies.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, no, I think the key word you said is relevance, right? We deal with relevant topics. So any feedback, any thoughts, best practices, things that are on your mind, we'd love to hear it, because Jerry and I are going to continue these executive communication exchanges over the next many weeks. So we invite you to give us your ideas and throw out your challenges.
I love it. I love it. Okay, Donna, thank you very much. And we will see you soon.
See you next time, Jerry.